Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to George Edwards from Speed Welshpool. Thank you for joining us today, George.
Thank you very much. Really honoured to have been invited. So great to see you again, Dave.
Thank you again. Can you give us an overview of your business and its position in the supply chain cycle, please?
Yeah. So Speed is based in Welshpool, which is quite a nice strategic location on the Mid Wales English border. Sort of 20 minutes from Shrewsbury. What do we do? So I suppose Speed has always started as a rural carrier. That's been its main sort of origins. So final mile delivery for networks into Wales. We have a huge territory that we cover, SY and LD postcodes, which are, if you look at a map, they're pretty expansive. The wider Emerge group that we are now part of, and where we sit in the supply chain cycle, the answer to that is pretty much everywhere, from manufacturer to consumer. So literally moving things from factory through global supply chains, freight forwarding into warehouses, and then to final mile to consumer.
Oh, thank you. And is it predominantly, full loads, part loads, pallets, parcels? What do you primarily do?
At Speed, I think that's a pretty good synopsis. At Speed, we will literally move everything from a jiffy bag all the way up to a full load, and there's lots of nuance in between that. So, membership of the DX network, and I know you've had Paul Libbitson on your podcast a few weeks ago. So DX Freight is IDW specialist, so they will handle everything from parcels to the less attractive areas of freight, lampposts, tires, big rolls of carpet, you name it. But also, member of two pallet networks means that we can give a cost-effective, environmentally efficient solution, if you like, for part loads and small pallet consignments. But then we've also got our general haulage. So we have 10, 12 vehicles on that day to day, moving full loads around the UK. So it's a bit of everything.
So it sounds like a very diverse and interesting business, and obviously with the geographics where you work, you cover, probably the drop density must be more challenged because of you covering quite a big area, aren't you?
Absolutely. So drop density is one. For the volumes coming in, you've got a lot of stem mileage to each delivery point. So that presents its own unique challenges. Stem mileage is a real interesting point. A lot of colleagues in the networks that I tend to speak to, they're quite used to having their furthest point from their depot only maybe 20 or 30 minutes. But for us, it could be 2.5 hours. So there's a real interesting, unique set of challenges with where we are. Absolutely.
No, fantastic. That's good. And tell us about how long has your business been trading, and what brought you into the business?
So Speed actually has its roots back to 1979, I think. And from that point, I think it started as a same-day carrier. I ended up in the business sort of the same time as my dad did. So in 2007, 2008, he joined Welshpool to develop the business, and then he started joining other freight networks. I fell into the industry as everyone else did, but joined Speed full time after university in 2013. So from 2007 to 2013, I was sort of a self-employed IT person, developing software and helping the tech of the business. And then 2013, I joined full time.
Oh, thank you. And probably that diversity into the tech world is probably very useful, because technology is I wouldn't say crap because it's been here a long time, but it's a big part of logistics today, and proving what you've done, proving the delivery, and the logistics world almost works by exceptions when you don't deliver it rather than when you do deliver it.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think the one thing I've found over the years is that the best opportunity to innovate comes when you're sort of sat on the fringe of two things. And it's given me quite a unique opportunity, sat on the edge of IT and sat on the edge of transport, to really see what's going on in both camps. And I think for some time, IT has been very much bleeding edge, very much fast innovating, and transport's been very much playing catch up. So it's, innovation comes from the outside, a wise man once said, and I totally agree with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So obviously, beside the STEM mileage, etc., which is an ongoing challenge for your business, what in the marketplace today, how would you describe the current challenges for your business in the current marketplace?
I think for me, with where we are, I think recruitment and skills is probably our current challenge, biggest challenge at the moment. I think there's a real shortfall of the skills and labor, labor skills in the workplace. Not necessarily just drivers. I think that's a whole topic, unto itself. But I think there is a lack of people coming into this industry, and I think I think that's very much a ticking time bomb as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's one of the perennial conversations we have, on these things. But I have with people in my other job, because most of us, as you mentioned earlier, sort of fall into it. I'm sure some do, but not many say, I'm going to join that wonderful logistics world. We fall into it and it gets under our skin and then we're in it,
Right. Yeah.
So, and going forward, obviously you've got the people issue at the moment and knowledge, what do you see as the biggest threats for your sector over the next sort of 3 to 5 years?
I think people skill shortfall, as I said, is a real big threat unless we really start to look at how we address that. But I also think lack of infrastructure investment. I think that's a real problem for us. I think from a general haulage point of view, I think the UK is quite poor compared to some of its European colleagues in terms of the transport infrastructure, not necessarily the roads and the tarmac, but rest areas, how we treat HGV drivers on the road. Through COVID for a brief sort of moment, we were the knights of the road and the heroes. But what our haulage drivers have to do out on the road is the conditions they're operating within continues to really surprise me, and I think that is something that needs addressing.
And do you think that should be ideally, challenged through, some leadership in the government and the, various societies, both within logistics and without logistics?
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I like the idea of a previous guest on your podcast, Paul Sanders, who mentioned that there should be a minister of logistics or minister of transport, and I think there needs to be a real at senior levels of government, there needs to be a voice and encouragement to look at these issues, such as the infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree totally. Because they're the ambassadors for every business. When I used to work in the sector, the driver, he or she, is the ambassador for your business and for the ultimate sender, and they do a great job, and it's rewarded better than it used to be, but probably not commensurate with other jobs in the world, really. Definitely not. So for what they do, I totally agree. And on the positive side, what are the biggest opportunities do you see in the sector for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is AI and IT. I think there's huge opportunity with leveraging AI further. And when people, I think it's a really, I don't know what you think, but I think AI is a real mixed or misunderstood term. People hear that and think of robots and and Terminator and that sort of thing. But actually, how AI can help us with complex challenges in our industry, which are highly specific. So, take one example, for instance, which is vehicle routing and optimization and planning. That's mathematically a really challenging thing to solve. And if you looked at traditional maths to solve it, you simply couldn't, which is why no one really has done much in that. But using AI, suddenly that opens up a whole Pandora's box of opportunity to solve that problem. So I think there's huge opportunities applying AI to some of our day-to-day challenges to enhance our business, improve service, drive costs down, and make us more efficient.
That's good. And interestingly, you mentioned AI because one of the questions I was going to ask you, because you are of a younger demographic than most of my podcast hosts, no offense to us all, not you, of course. Enough. How else do you see? Because that's the sort of, I say, a semi-logical way that AI will affect us and improve things. Routing, hub sortation, as in planning the routes for hubs. Do you think there's other wider things that it'll improve or develop or change over the next few years?
I think helping us understand data. We're all collecting an absolute treasure trove, monster amount of data every day in everything we're doing. Transactional data, where vehicles are, movements in warehouses, orders, etc., and there's lots of events through the point of manufacturer to consumer, tracking and track and trace, etc. I think that's very difficult for someone to assimilate. There's simply too much of it, and I think using AI to look at those data sets, data warehouses, if you like, that presents us with opportunity. We can take some real learnings out of that, and there's so much opportunity, and the opportunity, possibilities are endless. But you could look at things and say, right, how do we forecast delivery volume into certain areas? The networks can utilize that to help optimize, member trunking plans, etc. We know that this part of the UK is going to be busy at this time of year, and really sort of anticipating volume to help us plan better.
That'd be very useful, particularly in the sort of pallet networks and the parcel network, but certainly, the big super shippers like the Royal Mails, the Everys, that could really make a difference for them as well, and we'll talk about it further, but the green transition, and sadly, I'm sure there's a lot of fresh air carried around the country every night on empty vehicles sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting things that AI gives us are things like genetic algorithms. And that is a way of allowing iterations of solutions to problems and refinements each time. So where I think that could be really utilized in our industry is common problems, for instance, like how to lay out a warehouse, how to lay out an operation. Where is it best to put my vehicles, trunk vehicles or cross dock, shell racking, or simply vehicle routing and optimization problems? Genetic algorithms give us a really interesting opportunity to solve the problem, but continue, tweaking little things and iterating and seeing how optimal the next result is, but doing that very, very quickly over lots of generational changes. So, to my knowledge, that's this is something I learned at university 12 years ago, but I've never seen something like that used in our industry. So I think that's where the opportunity is, pulling things from somewhere else and running with them in transport and seeing where it goes.
No, thank you. And again, this is a lack of knowledge by me, and I'm sure a lot of others. As AI developments change, will we and companies like yourself access it through new software? Is that the way it will be accessed, or will it be some other way of how you actually access it, or is it actual learnings that each company will do?
I think I think that's a really interesting question. I think a lot of most software now, right, is in the cloud. It's internet based, it's in the cloud. That in itself gives us massive opportunity. We're not having to manage our own infrastructure. We're not having to worry about our own power consumption, upgrading hardware, backups and power and redundancy and all those sorts of things. So I think the answer to that is, looking at the transition to cloud. A lot of this stuff will be in the cloud. It will be looking at data sets within the cloud and within, sometimes may not necessarily be something you can see in the interfaces that you're using, but AI can access the same data and run sort of in the background to derive useful information from that data.
Okay, so it'll be almost evolutionary, rather than revolutionary, which is better and softer, because you've got any big bang things. Those changes are scary for businesses, aren't they? When you go from software A to software B, it's terrifying. But if it's an evolution, that will make it a lot more seamless, hopefully, and less risky, I think, for businesses.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for going over that. Appreciate that. What are people in the sector not talking about that perhaps they should be?
I think I'm sort of conscious we're coming back to IT in many ways, but I do think that's quite an interesting point. I think there's always been quite a fragmentation of data and a lack of interoperability. So what I mean by that is typically in a business world, I think we don't want people to access our data. We want to make it very difficult for people to access our systems and get their data to innovate and create new things. I think there's been an improvement on that front. Don't get me wrong, over the last 10, 15 years, but I think there's just not enough conversation about it compared to the wider IT world. I think cybersecurity is a lot, in terms of risk, it's a lot larger than people are giving it credit for. And I think finally, I do think there's a real ticking time bomb in terms of education, the education system in the UK, and how that is there to support and create the next generation of workforce for an industry like logistics.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's very interesting. Okay. Thank you. And it's good to see a perspective on things. And how do you see the green transition impacting the sector?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I think we're seeing operators running BEVs, battery vehicles, HGVs. I'm not entirely convinced that is the answer. Certainly for me in rural mid Wales, it just simply cannot work. In our Stoke-on-Trent operation, then that's very different because it's urban or more urban than Wales. I think the cost is a big hurdle. I think I have a real concern that buying a BEV versus a diesel powered truck is a significant cost difference, right? So my concern is that will the consumer pay for that in terms of the supply chain? But I think in terms of the green transition, I think a lot of work has been done. If you look at the Euro standards, Euro 6, that I was looking at the actual stats earlier. The improvement on Euro 5 was significant. More work needs to be done, absolutely. But I think we need to identify a cost-effective, practical solution. Batteries, I'm not entirely convinced are necessarily it.
Yeah, and in the conversations we have with people, both on podcast and general, whether EVs are the ultimate solutions, particularly on heavyweight vehicles, maybe in urban environments, and you've even got bikes and everything like that now in urban, but suburban and long haul for vehicles, the physical weight of the batteries is a challenge just in itself, isn't it? And the return on investment argument, etc., etc. And to drive this change, do you think that's something that will happen by itself, or should be, government led or driven?
It's a very interesting question. I think it does come back to that it would be great to have a minister to represent this industry that could work closely with associations like the RHA and FTA, or Logistics UK as they're now known, to explore and talk and just discuss these things in greater detail. And I think the important thing is this industry is under huge financial pressure. The last couple of years there are a huge amount of businesses out there struggling and actually failing. In the last 6 months we've seen some real unfortunately big transport companies that have failed. So I think that any change has got to be commercially viable for this industry. We've got to really recognise some of the unique pressures. And one thing I noted earlier, actually, things like diesel duty. government level Minister of Transport, for instance, Minister of Logistics, looking at things like diesel duty. There's a huge opportunity there. I think those things are much needed.
Okay, thank you. And ties in nicely, but the sort of final question, if you could speak to the Prime Minister, then what would you ask them to do to assist your business to grow and flourish?
Yeah. Look at infrastructure, particularly for haulage drivers out on the road. Look at rest areas and services. The security of that, the cost of using those. Look at Europe. Look at our European colleagues. Look at diesel duty. I think look at urban areas and operators, and really have a good look at places like London and the direct vision standard, which is a bit of a bureaucracy minefield at the moment. And I think also have a real good look at the education system. I went to university. University is great, but should we be encouraging as many people to go to university as we are? I don't necessarily think so. I think we should be promoting apprenticeships and other routes into this industry. And this industry is so vital and so overlooked. Virtually everything in the UK moves by road, and yet so many young people are just unaware of its role. And actually, it's a total blind spot. So I think there's huge change that needs to be, looked at there.
Wonderful, and perhaps we should celebrate the wonderful industry of logistics and how it works, and behind all the scenes, things we don't see. When you turn up to Sainsbury's or Tesco's, there's always fuels.
Absolutely.
And we always consumers take it for granted. We don't mean
we
to.
do, and I think it's also right down. We're all human beings, and it's right down to the level of, say, the driver. We don't think that when we pick up that bottle of water off the supermarket shelf that some drivers had to, perhaps leave his wife or partner at home early hours of the morning when he said that actually he'd be at home to get in a truck at 2:00 in the morning to go and deliver that load. And those are actually all the untold stories of the magic that happens in the sector.
Wonderful, thank you. I just want to say thank you, George, for your overview and painting the picture of both your business, which sounds a really interesting business, and the sector. I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I'm sure our listeners and viewers will love it. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.